yes, right. That's why you were host. That's why they gave you host. You
Okay.
are supposed to record.
Okay, we are now officially recording. Thank you all for joining today. Sorry, I know the last minute scheduling. And this is really to kind of continue the conversation from last Friday, and this will go into part of the agenda for Friday as well. So this is kind of to brainstorm, noodle, discuss, and then we'll see where we are on Friday. So, Friday will be the kind of official meeting to kind of see what to do with all this work that we do. So a question for you all. I know, as you know, Marion couldn't make it today. Billy will join. Abby, you and the group. What Marion and I did do is Virginia Clark sent some really thoughtful public comments in, actually around kind of goals and vision, which we thought might be a reasonable place to start. It doesn't mean we have to end up there. It doesn't mean it's right, but I think that she did some lovely work, and we thought maybe we could share a little bit of that with you all and see if that's a starting place for the conversation today. If it's not, we don't have to do it. But we just thought, so I have a little bit of a document I can pull up, if that makes sense, and I can give you 4 minutes worth, and then we can see if that makes sense or something else does. Is that okay?
That's good with me. Is it with everybody else? Did anybody else get a chance to read that over her comments? Okay.
All right, well, if that's okay, then let me share this. Okay, let me get my Zoom screen organized here. People see that document okay? All right, so really briefly, I think from our conversation on Friday, there were a few themes, and this is not perfect, that I want to just note as we start. That we really need to think about the vision and goals as people-centered, not just kind of like X% of forest cover or Y% of something in nature, but it's really needs to be people-focused. So that's one. That our vision and values, particularly the values you've already been doing, maybe can inform the vision. So we can go back to those, which are in your slideshow, to the VCC if need be. That this needs to emerge through this discussion we're having. That we need to make time, as Iris really nicely explained, and we need to stay on schedule both. So that's what we're trying to do. What Marion and Jane said, and you guys decide whether this is true or not, is this is important to try to do, but it's not essential. If we kind of get stuck, we have lots of other things to do, which leads us to David Muir's comment on Friday, which is sometimes it's easier to get to the strategies and the actions, and the goals emerge at the end, not the beginning. So we recognize sometimes it's harder to put the big goals up front until you've actually done the hard detailed work. So I don't know, so we'll see how that plays out. Okay, so the first thing in yellow at the end of the meeting on Friday, trying to listen as effectively as I can, I tried to put together a bit of a vision from the conversation you all were having. So that thing in yellow there, which I can go back to in a second, is just my probably poor attempt to try to capture the vision in some ways, recognizing, to Charlie's point on Friday, this is a little bit like the pathways summed up and turned into outputs. So I acknowledge Charlie's good point from Friday, but maybe this is a starting point for vision, which we can totally revamp.
And can we quickly clarify, because we're talking about visions now, which is another thing. Are visions the same as goals?
Yeah, right, no. So
no.
Let's go through the hierarchy to your good question. And this is something in rural resilience is doing too. Like, great question. So as I understand it, someone else weigh in here if they think differently. Like vision's kind of at the top of the hierarchy. It's a narrative. It's an end state you want to be in 2050. It's narrative. It typically doesn't have numbers next to it. And it's kind of a broad aspirational vision like an organization would have, or an effort, right? Then what we have is theoretically, between vision and pathways, there could be big goals. The cross-sector mitigation has the easiest one, which is we're gonna reduce carbon overall net or gross X% by Y date, right? That's easy because they have a very clear metric. So there'd be a vision, and then there'd be a goal, and then there'd be your pathways. Then there'd be your strategies to meet those pathways, and then there'd be your actions. Now, what makes this complicated is some of your strategies and actions could have goals too. Like if your pathway, or if your strategy is to, I don't know, conserve forest land, your strategies might be X, Y, and Z, including a goal to, protect X amount of forest cover or whatever. So that's where this gets messy, because goals can fit kind of at different levels. So this is where it's a little complicated, or just it's messy. Abby.
Where in that structure do metrics fit? Because I think some of what I'm struggling with is if the intent of this process is to, for example, allow for a quick and easy understanding of the co-importance of adaptation and resilience alongside mitigation and sequestration. Is it that we need broad goals to help people understand that we're seeing them as co-equal, or is it that we need metrics to help people understand, say in the legislature, how we're going to know that we've, sorry, I have a hungry cow over there. How we're going to know that we've met that. Does that make any sense? I think that's what I'm struggling with is real, like, I don't want to just go through an exercise because like, I don't want to waste people's time if it's not going to get us to what we need to get to. And I'm just wondering if how people are feeling about how we explain this, and do we think the goals are the way to do that, or I don't know. I'm finding it confusing to figure out where the metrics play in that help.
So let me take a crack at this, and then people should weigh in. We have a different view. So if you look at the 3 goals put forward by our public commenter, which are we'll get to in a second, there are things that are right now not numeric, right? Like increase carbon sequestration in soil biomass and surface water, so on and so forth. So you can see those 3 goals. So in the language of indicators and metrics and goals, God forbid, is, a goal is a broad statement, which usually indicates an indicator. In this case, the indicator is increase carbon sequestration in soil biomass, and the metric would be actually a number, right? Like a quantifiable thing. And so typically a goal has an indicator component, which is the thing you're trying to achieve, and then a way to measure it, which is the metric. The challenge here, to add to your confusion, which is totally understandable, is you can have metrics at all the different levels, right? And that's the challenge here, is it worth rolling everything up into some big goal with a metric for this committee, or is it better to focus on the strategies and actions and think about a whole set of metrics and indicators that are really more the objective, what I'll call the objective one? And I don't know. So any further questions on kind of the hierarchy that both Charlie and Abby are wisely asking about? And David, I know you've been through a lot of these exercises, so I don't know if you have thoughts about this either.
Well, am I on mute? I'm not muted.
We can hear you now. You're good.
My thinking honestly is that it just doesn't matter. As long as we have a structure that makes sense to us, that's somewhat logical, and that we are flexible and not too rigid about trying to make sure what fits into what categories, and that we capture the bulk of our good ideas. And in general, making sure that the really high level, meaning, vision, values, kind of high level mission things are captured high level so that the executive, summary captures those thoughts. Then whether stuff gets divided up between the pathway of strategy and action doesn't really matter. And to the extent that we tie outcomes where they're possible at whatever level works. And the part of my thinking around this is more about efficiency and time than anything, because I'm confident that if we had enough time, we could sort through and come up with a really pristine, logically consistent breakout of all of these things. We just don't have that kind of time. And it doesn't necessarily add a ton of value, because at the end of the day, whether we're advocates or we're policymakers, we'll take from this document the key pieces, and we won't spend a lot of time having to decide, well, I am only going to pay attention to goals, or I'm only going to pay attention to strategies. We'll read through it and in its completeness to draw what we want from it.
Oh, very helpful. Charlie.
Thanks. I guess 2 things. One would be when it comes to vision, which I think is kind of a new layer that we're adding to the top of this. I'd ask the counselors that are here who are a little bit more familiar with legislation. It seems like the vision would have been articulated in the legislation. Like there's a point as to this whole exercise, and it's to get to a certain state. I don't know what that is, but I would assume that there's something in there that could be drawn from rather than us coming up with this grand vision. And then I guess just personally, it seems like we're trying to split pathways and goals in a way where it's just, we don't need to. I mean, if you look at the goals that we've been talking about, they're essentially pathways. We can rephrase them in different ways, but we already have that. So, I mean, I guess what I would suggest is that if we're talking goals, we consider the goals, the pathways, and then we get into strategies, which we can actually attach metrics to on the timeline that we have in front of us. That to me seems like the most straightforward way. I just feel the more we try to tease apart pathways into goals, the more it seems like it's an exercise of just semantics.
Judy, over to you.
I have a question. The very beginning, you talk about people-centered. Where are people centered in these 3 goals?
Good question. I think they're under 3, it starts with enhance the ability of communities. So I think people are at least partially there.
So you're not going to ask people to reduce emissions?
That's up to you guys. Maybe you should. Yes.
Maybe you should.
Well, no, I'm leaving that to you, right? I'm completely indifferent. That's for you guys to make the call. I just pulled these 3 goals from what a public commenter made, just to seem like a starting point, but doesn't mean it's any stretch of a finishing point. So I think we need to. This is a fundamental question, which is I'm going to put it in different. Judy, I think that was your point, right?
Yes.
Lauren.
I actually have a question on the people-centered too, because we as a subcommittee early on, led by Judy, kind of talked about putting our natural resources, primarily soil, at the center, and realizing that one of the values that we presented as a subcommittee to the full council just a few weeks ago was that if you support nature, nature will support humans. So I just want to flag that I'm a little confused by people-centered goals, not necessarily aligning directly, though certainly indirectly, by our values that we decided on as a subcommittee.
I agree.
I think there was some take care of language that I don't have right now, but for sure. Judy, do you have another question or point?
Well, it just seems like it fits into every one of those goals. I mean, you want to increase soil and the storage of carbon in soil, biomass and surface waters, but that all takes people and action and education as to how people can do that. It just seems like people belong in every one of these things.
And I think, correct me if I'm wrong, Judy, I think the pathways as written try to capture more of that you just
Well,
said.
that was my piss and moan last week. The pathways don't include everything. And so a lot of our strategies will get lost if they don't have a pathway to go into.
Which we can definitely come back to making sure that, right, again, our pathways are in my view, is a working framework, and if they need to be added to before you're done, they need to be added to, either in themselves or new ones. Abby, if you're gonna.
I guess Judy, I think I'm slightly confused by that, because I thought we had agreed on, or because we put the pathways forward to the Climate Council, so I guess I was operating under the assumption that we were, that they were what we had agreed upon. So
that's why I said when, I think it was Marion read them, and she said there was consensus. I said, no, there isn't consensus.
okay. Okay, so it seems like two of the first things that need to happen is, does this group feel that establishing goals is a useful exercise for this, for collating or organizing our work and priorities moving forward? Or do we want to just simply utilize the pathways as our goals and then work on the language within the pathways to get to actual consensus and to identify what we feel is missing there? I think we need to understand that as a group.
Right. I mean, I think there's a fundamental question here, and I think, let me put one nuance to it and then come back to maybe the way Charlie suggested, is that, for sequestration, if you wanted to pick a number, a metric, and a goal for sequestration, you can do it, right? You have the information and the knowledge, at least in the next few months, to be able to do that if you want to. I assume under cross-sector mitigation, but I don't fully know, you also could pick a number for GHG emissions reductions from operations, though we know there's a net gross thing that Ryan's mentioned many times. The goal 3, the one about adaptation and resilience, is the hardest to figure out. That it's not clear there's any single metric to do it, right? It just doesn't have it. So, one option is to do, as you said, I'm going to go to Charlie's thought, pull a vision from the statute if you even need it. Pathways or goals. Strategies will include metrics where they make sense, do the actions, make sure your people, human takes care of nature, nature takes care of humans. And if you need to create a new pathway as you work through this, you can. Or do you want to try any big, broad goals for this group at this point? And again, you don't have to. Judy.
Patrick, I would disagree with you that the cross-sector has measurable goals. They probably do have measurable goals, but they have not once included equity in their programs and their suggestions or strategies or recommendations. So are they really goals or strategies if there's no equity in them?
Or are they goals, but they're inequitable, potentially.
Right.
So I think, again, I think to David's point, as long as you work through the details, you have a logic that you're committed to and can share with others. We don't have to get too wrapped around the axle, so to speak, about all this. But I do think we want some clarity from you all how you want to frame this, and and also not get in the way of the detailed work you need to do in looking at your strategies and actions. Judson.
Hi, I'm confused by his goals, and I don't know if you remember way back when Jane gave us this ag and ecosystem strategy template, which had primary task area, 3 columns for the goals, your strategy columns for ready to implement, estimated timeline, and then it goes on to MCA tool and others. Based on that formatting, the goals are, as I just put in the chat, a quantitative goal if known, or narrative if otherwise. They were measurements to meet the goals set by legislature. Now we're talking about goals as framing the pathways. That to me is completely different. And I'm not sure what we're trying to do. As Charlie mentioned, I don't really know why we need to fit all these pathways into simpler goals. The goals or metrics are to help us have milestones as we to reach these goals, I guess, set by legislature. So I think it would help the group if we figured out what we want for goals. Are they milestones, or are they a way of framing the pathways, which I feel like we don't need to get simplify any further. The pathways are common pathways are simplified far enough, in my opinion. But, thank you.
No, I think that's the question, Justin, for sure. David.
Again, just going back to a theme, I'm happy to take the goals out. I think also if Judy wanted to try to rewrite them in a way that, captured her perspective around having people engaged, that would also be okay. What I like about these sentences, whatever we call them, and I would like to see them in somewhere in this document. Maybe it's even as an introductory piece of our how we present this, is that this is response to one of the concerns I had as we initially started. That was that I was afraid that the focus was going to be on just how to reduce greenhouse gas emissions from the ag and forestry sector, period. And that was somehow what was going to limit our work. And that's important, but it's completely insufficient and misses the larger point, which are captured in the other two, what are described here as goals, which is that we have this incredible opportunity to, by investing in the protection of our forests and farms and managing them sustainably, we have huge opportunities to sequester, store carbon. And, it's captured in what's called goal 3, the ability to increase resilience of the landscape. So it doesn't matter to me that they're goals or not, but I do think that having the 3 ideas together as a piece of what we're trying to achieve, each a critical piece of what we're trying to achieve is important. And it does provide some interesting, I think then as you look at our, some of the pathways hit on all 3 of those, some only hit on one of the goals. You can mix and match it. So that's my perspective. Again, I think arguing about whether it's a goal or not is not a good use of our time.
I mean, I think one thing to note, David, to that is I need to go back to the statute to make sure I have this right. But generally, goals 1, 2, and 3 are really the charge, in part, the charge of the legislature to you, via the Climate Council to this subcommittee to do those things, 1, 2, and 3. So in some ways, they really are the charge that in some language, maybe not exactly this, is set out in statute. Okay, so I think, again, I want to put a proposition, and if someone feels differently, let us know. I think we haven't talked about whether we want a narrative vision or not, and whether we just pull it from statutes. That's a question we'll come back to. But I think what I'm hearing is let's not try to get too wrapped up around getting these big goals in front of us right now. Let's recognize pathways really are goals to mark to where we go, and within strategies and actions, when we have metrics, milestones, targets to mark how we're doing towards those. And that's really where we should spend our time, is really fleshing those out. Recognizing 2 things. Equity needs to be kind of infused across and in all of these things ongoing. And one thing we'll talk about on Friday is that we don't have the equity tool yet, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't do equity. We just need to keep doing it. And if we don't get it right, when the equity tool comes along, we'll fix it. But I don't think we can leave it behind in the meantime. It just has to be part and parcel of all the discussions. And then I think Judy raises an important question about this reduced consumption and how much that fits into this task group's activities and discussions, and how much that needs to be in front of the Vermont Climate Council as a very important discussion about a key, I don't know what you call it, strategy pathway goal, but what are we going to say about reducing consumption? And it keeps coming up, so it's really important to know, I think, what to do with that. Okay, so is anybody striving for, no, we should really work towards a few big goals for this group right now? Is anybody saying really gunning for that? Not seeing anybody jump.
I think the ones you've presented here, Pat, are helpful. They're directional, but I don't think they're necessary if it complicates things.
Anybody else comment on that? Okay, on vision, you have articulated very nicely some values, which are in the slides that was Lauren and Abby or Billy, whoever presented. Do you want to work more on a vision now, or is that something we pull from statute and kind of leave it at that? And this would be a narrative, that kind of goes on top of the discussion, you'll be having with the powers that be, quote unquote. How important is a vision right now to work on?
Simply having, essentially stating what our interpretation is of the charge to us from the legislature seems an important piece. So in some ways, that's the value of having the language that's currently listed as goals. But having this vision, making sure we all agree that this is, what we think our charge is. Maybe it's not a vision, maybe it's just our charge. Like this is the work that we've done. This is what we're intending to present to you, the reader, based on our work.
Other people's thoughts on what David said or differently? Abby?
What are people's thoughts around this, what is highlighted in yellow here?
Let me make it bigger. Easier to read.
Ironically enough, if there's anything missing from it, it's that it doesn't make any reference to the need to also reduce the carbon emissions from activities on the land.
Let's see, Iris asks, is that in lieu of some more quantifiable metrics for 2050? I wouldn't see it as being so. I would see it more as a, like Pat said, an overarching narrative statement or vision statement, however you want to frame it, as to where we're hoping to go. And then there would be quantifiable metrics in addition to that. But again, as I understand it, this is all up for interpretation.
I think if we take kind of Charlie's thinking, the metrics, milestones, targets end up kind of showing up probably in the strategies and maybe a pathway or two. We'll see, but they'd be kind of lower down and maybe more of them. Charlie.
I guess getting to the highlighted part we're looking at and the idea of a vision. As we're talking about it, I guess I'm not clear entirely, like, what is the purpose of the vision? You know, if we have a vision in it, is this just like a super summation in brief, or is I'm not sure what we're trying to get at, I guess.
And
how it relates to everything else.
You know, as there's typically visions, like this is like organizational development stuff, right? Like, so visions for organizations, often there's a vision, which is like a future state you want to be at, right? Like, you know, for us, it's something about, we want all people to solve problems collaboratively. I don't know, giant vision, probably impossible to achieve, right? And then a mission might be something, you know, we put people to work to do collaboration through facilitation, mediation, and then who all knows what else we would say, right? So part of it is just a hierarchy of kind of capturing of aspirational future state. The other thing is, to David's maybe point, it sometimes is useful for messaging to people to understand, what are you trying to achieve in the broadest of terms? And then how are you going to do that in a way that's one page or shorter? Because a lot of legislatures and powers that, you know, decision makers, they don't read much beyond that. So it's also in order to reporters necessarily, or sometimes even the casual reader. So it's partly a messaging communication tool. Doesn't mean you have to have it. Judy. Judy, you're on mute.
For me, this statement brings us right back into our very first conversations. We're talking here about co-benefits such as income and wood production and biodiversity, and water quality. Those are all, water quality and biodiversity are a good thing, but all the other things are not putting us on an equal slate, because we're saying incomes and wood production, all of those things again are putting economy first before caring for the land. And you want the Vermonters to be resilient and be able to adapt, but what about the land? We're working so hard to make the land not adaptive and resilient. And this is the very first conversations we had, is economy is not the end all to be all. The health of the land is.
Fair point. And again, the co-benefits implies benefits to human beings, right? It's already got a.
Yeah, but you don't have anything listed for a co-benefit for the land, just for the people.
The attempt, which has probably failed, was to put on equal footing, kind of more like you just noted, the economic stuff, but also important things like water quality, biodiversity, and kind of put it all on kind of equal footing. That may not be, they didn't achieve that. And maybe it's not important to put in here either, or even have. The intent was to put those all on equal footing. It apparently didn't succeed.
I'm not seeing the value of this vision, given the detail of the act, the detail of the goals, and the subsequent pathways and strategies below those. That's just my opinion personally.
That's helpful. Alex, over to you.
I thought along the same lines as Billy, we've got some real hard goals, and Iris put something in the chat, which is pretty interesting. And I see this as a little bit bending over backwards to understand what this person is saying. I appreciate actually, the attempt to have a real vision. It's very important. In all of these discussions, I find that people don't actually know even what their own vision is, and they're all confused about what you're trying to do. So it's good to have that vision, have a vision. If this is not the right one, to Judy's point, then we could rewrite it. It could be part of a narrative, a context, something that we clearly agree on. And I'm other than that, I'm not sure what the value is, or that's where I'm thinking about it. I confess, I have gotten lost in what we're trying to write with these goals. I saw a number of tables and I tried to think, how do I add my stuff into these tables? I'm sorry, I don't, I'm not up to speed on it in that sense, but that's what I was thinking maybe could be done with this one.
Alex, I'm just going to sum up as simpler is better here. That's okay. Iris, I want to go to your comment and I want to give you the mic for a second to raise the point you raised in chat.
Yeah. I mean, I'm just saying, part of what I was looking for to come out of this is some metrics that we can have that are maybe broader than like specific metrics that would be for each strategy, but metrics that we can use to solidify in the statute so that we can have equal legal requirements to be meeting sequestration and other, just meeting these goals the way we are meeting the greenhouse gas requirements, because I think that when the rubber hits the road and we start getting crunch time, we're going to fall back on what we're legally required to do. And so, I mean, for this plan, it's definitely too late, but I think that as we're coming back in 4 years, if we have legal requirements to meet certain goals for 2025, 2030, and 2050, that was what I was looking for out of this, not necessarily like a visioning thing, though I think that would have been important earlier in the process. But I mean, I was thinking of some specific ones, and the sequestration goals seem important to have in statute.
Right, Iris, thank you very much. And again, I think the important point Iris made, but I think Jane made last time too, is that, right now, the only real hook in the legislation that is suable, therefore powerfully actionable, is the mitigation, right? The carbon emissions reductions. And so if you don't achieve it, you can be sued, right? Which is a powerful incentive to get it right. You don't have that for zones adaptation. So to Iris's point. So I think I'd say a few things. Maybe a vision will emerge, but maybe it's better to use the statute to provide that and the like for what we have, and maybe have a narrative we can work on in the coming months as you frame this all up. Clearly, you've got your pathways, which we may need to modify or add to, as Judy has raised. And you all know you need to go to work on strategies and actions, including some metrics or targets or milestones to go with them, in part to be clear and specific and measurable, in part potentially to address Iris's really important point. There may be multiple ones, maybe not just one, but those are things that will need to be built over the next few, the next 6 weeks, frankly, as you work on this, and then maybe a little bit beyond. Abby.
So for the benefit of our time today, do we think, I don't know if we need to take an actual vote on this or how we need to go about it, but I think we need to sort of make some decisions to be able to move forward on something. I really like what Iris is raising, and I'm wondering if today we need to decide that the pathways are our subcommittee's major sort of introduction to our overarching themes, et cetera. And again, to Judy's point, if they're not where they need to be, maybe we need to have some discussion about that, one, and then two, have a bit of open discussion or visioning to try to produce some of those big metrics and milestones that Iris is talking about, that we could make a suggestion in our recommendations that when the legislature does go back to the climate action plan, or when it's revisited in 4 years, or even if they revisit it at some point before then, here's how statutorily we believe you can accomplish sequestration, adaptation, and resilience metrics and milestones equivalent to the GHG reduction requirements.
And so Abby, a question to that point and Iris's point is it possible as you now begin to dive into the strategies and actions and think about at least for some specific targets, and you'll begin to amass this list, right? And then prioritize, that we can look at those and decide whether maybe you're gonna have 20 of them, right? You say, hey, we shall have them all. Maybe it's just that, geez, of those, maybe we ought to elevate 5 or 6 of them or whatever, 3 or 4, and put them more front and center in our final sort of recommendation. So I'm wondering if those can, as you get into the details of strategies and actions and vetting those, you can think about these metrics, milestones, and then when you've done that, you can decide what to do with the ones you've come up with, rather than try to do anything now where it's a little bit hard to think about what they would be in detail. So they should hopefully emerge.
I think that makes sense to me. I'm really trying to hit the right balance of both, of sort of what Iris brought up last time, right? We're on a deadline that isn't going to change. We need to get some, we are like rubber is meeting the road here. So, but we've also talked that we need to have some open discussions about this. So what can we do in this time to get some ideas on paper that move us forward towards where we want to be?
I can say that in the natural forest and working forest task group earlier this week, we discussed baking in some of those clear metrics into our strategies. Like specific percentages of old forest across the landscape. I think we're going to wait to see on the carbon budget a bit to understand kind of the levels of sequestration and storage happening. And, we'll likely discuss whether we, keep that as a baseline and some percentage above that in our strategies and action items. So I think we're hoping to likely get into some of those details at that level of granularity. So I know that's been a discussion we've had recently.
And I don't know whether the ag group, Abby or Ryan, or the other groups also were thinking about where we're already beginning to think about potentially some metrics or indicators.
Yeah, I think many of the pathways that came out of 5C dovetail well into the broader pathways that are elevated by Ag and Eco to focus on the discussion between goals and pathways. I think processes is an important step to being able to quantify the existing ongoing work that's occurring by farms to adopt practices and management on their farms that have co-benefits in these respective areas, whether it's sequestration, emission reduction, or the provisioning of adaptive and resilient agricultural crop fields. So for us, it's, we can get down into any number of technical details about how to track and report and quantify, but developing a protocol and having an inventory that can account for these changes is an important starting point that I would elevate as part of the emission and sequestration conversation. Needs to be part of our goals and vision. I think this co-equal footing is important to acknowledge in this this sector, natural and working lands. These land uses do both. It's not just an emission. You can have sequestration as well from these lands, and getting those on co-equal footing for these agriculture, forestry, and other national working lands, I think is a vision I would certainly endorse. Whether that's a goal, strategy, pathway, not sure where to put it. But yeah, quantifying baseline process, I think, is also an important consideration.
Let me just do one more thing here. Sorry about this. That's a word or not.
Pat, can I ask a question?
Sure.
Can we maybe put up a blank page and literally go around and every person say off the top of their head, what is a metric or milestone that upon seeing that in 2050, you would know that we had achieved something that meant something to you?
Yes, would people like to do that? And let's go around one by one, and you can name one, you can name a few, a bit of a brainstorm, which I think being candid like this to Effie's a good point, maybe helpful if people get their mind around this a little bit more. What I was typing above was ultimately something we can kind of test for consensus, but we'll do that in a little bit.
I'll start.
Good. All right, fire away.
Average age of the farmer down to 40.
Hang on one second, let me just get my bullets right. Whoops, what happened there? Hang on. Sorry, I got a formatting problem. I'll fix it in just a second. Okay, so average age of farmer down to, what is it now roughly?
59, I believe.
Okay.
So maybe 45 is more reasonable, but let's go for 40. Let's dream big.
Exactly.
Woo!
Good. All right. Somebody else. Potential milestone, metric goal. John.
Oh God. Well, I would like to see zero. No, zero is probably probably too far. A 90% of cropland is covered 90% of the time with a growing cover. And my addition, just which is linked, of course, is 0.5% increase in organic matter per decade up to 2050.
In soils or in John, just where?
In soil organic matter, yep.
Great. All right, nice. Somebody else. These are great. Charlie, do you have some things that come to mind?
Sure. Yeah, we have a lot. I mean, a metric could be that the legislature has enacted revised criteria for Act 250 to mitigate forest fragmentation.
To reduce, or I don't know what the right words are, but reduce.
And so just as we're doing this, can I just flag that it seems like what we're doing is we're establishing metrics for strategies that are under pathways. So for example, we have like a preserve, restore pathway, right? And so a strategy under that pathway is regulatory action through Act 250. And a benchmark is that there's a revision to Act 250. So it seems like what we're doing now is we're actually coming up with metrics or benchmarks for individual strategies. Because you could kind of work backwards all of these to get to a pathway, if that makes sense.
And I think part of the value of doing those is exactly to figure out what level they're located at. Charlie, to your really good point. Charlie, I have a question for you. I don't know whether I'm not sure what the right words are, but like, is there a no forest loss cover or net increase in forest cover? I don't know what the forestry thing should be, but
I mean, yeah, that could be a separate one. I mean, we're going to get multiple ones. That there's no that there's a net gain in forest cover by some date. I mean, the one that is listed here is more of a regulatory act to get to a certain end.
I'm copying some good stuff from chat. I'm just tossing it in here for the heck of it. So, David, any metric that's important to you?
I was going to say that the net gain of forest cover, and I think there's some kind of related pieces there too, like an increase in the forest acreage that's managed and harvested sustainably. And similarly, I think we could have a similar parallel set of milestones or goals for agriculture, that we want to both reverse the decline, we want to reduce the permanent conversion of both forest and ag land, and hopefully get a net increase in the amount of land in ag. And also that the land that's in agriculture, that there's a greater percentage of that that's managed in a sustainable way.
Okay. Judy, how about you?
I guess I would like to see equity in all of those things.
If you like, if this may be hard to do, but if you like, can you imagine an equity goal either with any of these or across all of them? That would, I don't know what number would be associated with it, but it would be associated. Do you have any thoughts about potentially a metric that would go with equity?
I don't even know how to measure that. I mean, there should be fairness to all, but there isn't right now. And I would hope that by 2050, people understand there needs to be fairness to all.
This doesn't really answer the broad question that Judy's framing and that you've asked, Patrick, but I do think like one concrete thing might be that there's increased access to the benefits of Vermont's farms and forests to all Vermonters.
I just want to flag that it seems like with some of these, we're kind of not drifting backwards, but we're kind of drifting upwards in what we're talking about, because it seems more like, are we trying to come up with something that's measurable and a metric or an action that once enacted would be like a checkbox or an end state, right? Because there's end states that we're listing, but now I'm unclear, are we talking about end states or the metrics to get there, I guess, because we're kind of starting to combine these in a way.
So Charlie, are you saying you can't measure diversity, or you can't measure the impacts and equity on people, so don't include it here?
No. I'm just trying to get clarity on kind of in my head. My brain tends to work analytically in terms of like process and levels, and it seems like we keep drifting back and forth between like an action versus an end state to get, or an action to get to an end state versus an end state, if that makes sense. And I realize there's some overlap here, but
I think some of that, Charlie, I completely understand what you're saying. I also have gotten the impression that for people whose brains don't work like that, sometimes something like this is needed. I would be one of them, where like you do sort of just need to throw things against the wall, and we haven't had a full subcommittee. We haven't done this as a full subcommittee. We've done it in task groups, but we haven't done it or at least if we have, I don't remember. So I think if we can, I know it feels like there might be no purpose to this, but I think I still see this as useful, even if it doesn't fit into a framework necessarily, because I don't know. I still
Yeah.
see this as something that is necessary to move us forward to understanding kind of the ways that each of our brains think about how we're going to know that we've gotten where we need to be, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. I guess I just trying to see kind of what we're trying, yeah, anyway, never mind.
No, I think what's useful, like, I wouldn't worry too much about where these things go just yet at what level. Charlie, you maybe you're probably one step ahead of me for sure, because you're thinking really logically. I think it's important to get on the wall, see kind of what people mean by when they say a target or metric. And then as you do your work, we can figure out where we slot them, right? And I think that's the goal here. And Charlie, you among others probably can help us when we get a little further along, begin to slot these in that logical fashion David described, as we again partly explain to ourselves and then to others. Any other potential milestones people want to name, targets people want to name here? Lauren, you've been very quiet today, so you don't have to speak, but if you are super thoughtful, so any thoughts you have about this?
Well, I see you already captured the one that I dropped in there, so I figured I would just leave it at that.
Okay.
I put one in the chat also, Pat, but I don't know that, do
Did I
with it
get
what you
that?
may.
Did I get that one? I think I got one of yours, but I'm not sure.
I think you double pasted Lauren's.
Oh,
yeah,
that's, okay. Oh, here it is. Got it.
Doubly important, Billy, doubly important.
Exactly. That's okay. Sorry about that. Let's try this. There we go.
I look forward to your lobbying and advocacy around a state land use plan.
It'll be seamless, not controversial at all.
All right. I think this is a good list for people to keep in mind, particularly as we begin to think about strategies and the like. Ryan, go ahead.
You're muted, Ryan.
Sorry about that. I've lost the screen over the past week, so I'm down to tabbing around. Apologies. What was I going to do? I was going to read something from the Pamper Ecosystem Services Working Group. The working group envisions a system in which farmers are hired to use their ingenuity and know-how in caring for the land to rebuild Vermont's natural capital. Natural capital translates to soils and healthy soils, and it acknowledges the opportunity for farmers that steward their land in environmentally good ways. So a goal could be there exists a program in which farmers are valued and compensated for the benefits they provide to the state beyond food and fiber. I think that'd be a important goal and something we're working towards. So I'll throw that one out there. Thanks.
I'm going to get it quite right, but I got something in there.
Yeah, PES program.
That's good.
For agriculture, and you could add that too. I read, Billy, your comment. Forest natural landowners are probably compensated for climate benefits associated with their land ownership management. If you threw agricultural lands in there as well, it could be a PES program for all national working land managers.
Sounds good.
Good. All right. Okay. Abby, does that at least give us a start of really getting concrete and specific about what people are thinking? Is that helpful?
I think so. I was just trying, it seems, maybe it's just me, but I'm floundering. I'm feeling like we did all of this work and now I don't know. It just felt like we needed to try something a little different than.
Yep, I think it's good.
So I'm more curious. It's not about me. I'm more curious about everybody on the line. Like, I'm not the one that only needs to get us where we need to go. So, yeah. I'm just trying to help get us as a collaborative to where we need to be.
Lauren, over to you.
Well, while we're sharing how our individual brains work, I think I've heard, I won't speak for anybody, but I think that I've heard over the past couple of meetings that we're sitting atop a massive pile of strategies, some of which are actually actions. We just haven't done the work to get it down there. Last week, the task leads were asked to send our comprehensive lists into you, Pat, and Marion. I know Marion had to leave. But I feel like, for me at least, the best way to move forward is to kind of look at that comprehensive list of strategies, remove the ones that are redundant, of which I know there are many, so we can actually reduce that number and feel a little less encumbered by how many there are to work with. Make sure that we think that they're bucketed appropriately for our existing 6 pathways, and then kind of create our higher level metrics for 2025, 2030, and 2050 at the strategies level. I think once we get rid of a lot or merge a lot of like similar themes or similarly worded strategies, once we like remove some of the strategies that are actually actions and put them in their appropriate strategy bucket, I think it just seems like if that's the end game anyway, that seems to be the next most logical step for me, at least, to kind of move this forward. Using this larger visioning exercise and having it documented here will be really helpful, because we can kind of pull from this and attribute some of the metrics that we're hoping to achieve at the strategy level.
Okay, so let me try to where I think you are, to see if you agree, and this would give us a good lead into Friday. So I think the notes we just took for kind of potential goals, metrics, indicators, we're going to call them, are really good. There are different levels. That's okay. They're really useful. People are going to know potentially the list that you might actually ultimately assemble, right? And I'm not done yet. So here's where I think we are. A summary and broad description of the subcommittee's charge and statutory expectations will be sufficient, rather than trying to create a whole and special vision. So we're not looking for any vision beyond what I just described above, in terms of kind of just generally capturing the charge and of the subcommittee and the statutory expectations. That pathways may need additional revision or addition as we iterate between pathways, strategies, and actions. So, you know, that you put forward what you did to the VCC for now, but you can modify those as you go, as you do this, to make Judy's point. That strategies are most likely where the metrics, milestone, targets are probably most possible, as we just described. And we still have numerous actions to kind of consider and vet right within this framework. That equity has to be infused across and throughout the discussions. And then kind of after we do all that, we can consider when we might elevate in our recommendations to put resilience and adaptation on equal legal footing in future legislating statute. So it's kind of a note to self we'll have to come back to. And then to Lauren's point, we got to kind of get to work with the strategies and actions. We need to collate, which actually Marion's doing this week, eliminate redundancy, evaluate and prioritize with MCA and an equity lens, and then begin to kind of really formulate those. So that's my sense of where you are. And I know some chats coming in as well. And as Lauren pointed, we will save the chat too, if there's good stuff in there. Absolutely. So of this little thing I just highlight here, is that where we are? Does anybody disagree or want to modify? This is kind of where we are for the moment.
Can I ask a question that isn't about us, but connects to us?
Sure, ask away.
I've come to the realization that you are not going to ask for additional time. And so I do appreciate that people chose to have an additional meeting so that we could iron out some of this stuff and get some of this stuff in the right track to meet that goal. My concern is that committees are reducing the times they meet. Like the steering committee meeting that Jane asked me to go to on tomorrow has just been canceled. So how is that going to upset the cog if we're increasing and getting our work done and everybody else is decreasing the amount of time they're meeting?
fair. I certainly don't know how to answer that good question. I don't know if other folks who are more involved with the council than I am can respond to that.
I don't know. I think folks are working at the pace that they feel is necessary to do the work. So I don't know the specifics of the meetings you're referring to, Judy. So I can't kind of speculate beyond that. Sorry.
I'm not, I don't know much more either. I think when and if subcommittee members have concerns or questions about the climate council process and or the cross-sectoral functioning of the subcommittees, right? You know, where they meet up, bump up against things, and oh my God, and everything. Sorry, that it is of benefit for that to be flagged in some way. So whether it's that you and I have a separate conversation about that, and I can try to figure out a way to bring that to the full council level, your specific concerns, because we haven't really talked about that at a council level, but certainly that's a reasonable, I mean, it seems like something we probably should at some point. How do we as a council honor and incorporate the work that has been done in the subcommittees and the concerns, questions, perspectives that are coming up at the subcommittee level that we don't have a process set forth to handle as a full council? I don't have a better answer today, but I'm certainly happy to both follow up and talk with you more specifically about it, Judy, and then also to try to think about how we move forward as a council with that aspect of things, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. But I'm like thinking of the cross-sector committee and all of the things that they haven't done that we were told they were covering, and they're like meeting every other week. How are if we're under the assumption they're working on XYZ and they don't have that assumption at all? It's like the left hand doesn't know what the right hand's doing.
I think particularly if this concerns equity, I guess the most constructive thing that I think could be done is that the Just Transition Subcommittee needs to be made aware of our concerns in this regard, so that they can understand that that's been flagged, so that they can make sure that that's addressed as they're then bringing in somebody to train the other subcommittees to incorporate equity. I guess that's the best thing I can think of, because I don't have any real window into how cross-sector is functioning, and I don't really have the time to do that. So that's what I'm struggling with. So it's either that you could reach out to cross-sector, the people on cross-sector, or go to the Just Transition Subcommittee. And again, if you would like me to do that, I'm happy to, and flag for them these concerns that you have and the questions that this process is raising, and then we can kind of go from there.
Yeah, well, as you know, I have reached out to them, and people have reached back saying they want to talk to me. It might be mid-September to the end of September.
Iris, I don't know if you have any insight into this that you want to share.
Just that I will bring these concerns to Just Transition, because those are meetings I attend. No need for you to add that to your schedule, Abby. And I would also always invite Judy to those meetings, or just to connect. You know, we can connect and then figure out what to do with Just Transition so that we can make this happen.
And I get thanks. Thank you, Iris. And I just want to add that I think we've long discussed compiling recommendations and strategies and actions that we brainstorm within our subcommittee that are more the purview of other subcommittees, and sharing it with those groups. my hope is that as we focus on strategies on Friday, we can, build that list out of the larger list that we've all developed in our task groups, and then formally communicate them to the other subcommittees that have that oversight, and make it very clear that, if it's the consensus of this subcommittee that those other groups pursue them, that we make it clear and task them with that responsibility. Whether they choose to do that or not may ultimately be up to them, but we should at least, clearly communicate our interests to them on the record.
Thank you, Billy, because the problem I see is not whether they choose to address it or not, but that they have no clear path as to what is equitable with that particular issue.
Yeah. So hopefully with a combination of, us providing those suggestions and the just transitions, kind of supporting the equity analysis, we can hopefully get some progress on this front.
And again, it may be, I don't know what the scope of work is like, but for the equity analysis and the support coming forward, as Jane mentioned, I think last meeting, it may be in particular, if the concern is particularly cross mitigation, that they need to focus some effort there in particular. Maybe the potential, the need there. Okay, so again, what I've got up on screen is, I think, where we're at. If anybody disagrees, let me know. I will copy the chat when it's done into this messy document, clean it up a little bit, and just send it out to everybody so you have it. Though the recording and there's official notes that get developed, at least briefly. So, but I'll make sure you all have this, including just the chat copied verbatim. Charlie.
Thanks. I just wanted to clarify kind of specifically around what we're going to look at Friday. One of the things here is that strategies, actions, collating them across the task groups, limiting redundancies, which I was under the impression that Marion's been working on. So is the expectation that on Friday, the bulk of our time is going to be spent essentially working through the full collated list and attempting to tie them to a pathway or pathways and establish kind of whether it's a strategy, an action under a strategy, and if it's a metric, I guess. Is that the idea for Friday, is that we'll work through that list and see if we can kind of massage it into the framework that we've been developing, or is that not what we're looking at doing Friday?
Billy and Abby, do you want to speak to that a little bit?
I don't exactly know, because I haven't seen what Marion has been working on. I think she was hoping to complete that for us today or tomorrow. But yeah, I think the agenda that's posted right now has a block of time to talk about that compiled list. And, I think I personally need to kind of see the list to understand like exactly what we can accomplish on Friday. But I think that's the overall intent, Charlie, is to kind of reconcile everything and then begin to kind of tease out those action items and metrics. As Lauren said, by just looking at the words on paper, which is sometimes the easiest way to make progress.
So I think Charlie will, in some ways we'll try to go with Mary to try to see if actually somewhat what you describe as possible, given Billy's point, we haven't seen it yet, and how far she takes it in terms of associating the pathways or trying to clean up redundancies, we don't know. The other thing we talked about, at least trying maybe a few times this Friday, or if not this Friday, next Friday, is take some of those strategies and take the MCA tool and the equity focus and as a group run through some of those to see what we come up with. And then that will tell us how to organize our work beyond next Friday, right? If it turns out if the full group can do that and do that efficiently, we'll do it as a full group. If it turns out that's way too slow, we'll have to figure something else out. I think that's also the intent, is to begin to actually really sort of vetting these ideas that are in this kind of consolidated matrix. Okay, I'm aware of the time. We really appreciate people buying that extra hour and 15 hour and 20 today. I think it was, I know sometimes a confusing, if not painful discussion, but I think we kind of landed in a direction which is good. And I think by Friday, we're kind of ready to get down to business on some of these things and really figure them out with, again, the reminder that we do need to come back how to make this work as powerful as cross-sector mitigation in the legislation or future legislation in the future. And we will circle back to that to Iris's point as we continue to do the detailed work. So I want to give people a few minutes of their day back, unless co-chairs, anything else you want to make sure we cover? Julie or Abby?
I don't think so.
I don't think so. I'm, hoping people are feeling okay.
I'm sorry that David left. I understand why he had to leave, but I'm sorry he left with the comment that he left in the chat, because I wish he was here to explain it, exactly what he meant by being obscured by the discussion that we were all have been listening to. I'll be interested to see what he says on Friday.
I think David thinks to get down to the work and the details. And he's a policy guy who had a charge and had to enact things. It's in his former role. And so I think that's probably how David's brain thinks too. Like, what's actionable? Can someone in a position of management actually do this? What are they supposed to do?
Well, I share that in a lot of ways. I'm much better with a hammer and nail in my hands than I am with any other tool in my hands. So it's sometimes I look forward to the building process.
Right. All right. Anybody else? Any final words today? And we'll get some material out and hopefully get to hammering and building on Friday. Alex, anything else? Good. All right. Thank you, everybody. Really appreciate it. Thanks all. We'll see you all on Friday.
Thanks, everyone.
Everyone.